Hey folks, thanks for watching. As I start these videos in the morning, I'll often look at the storm predictions and reports over the last 24 hours. I do that to get a handle on where we saw the storm activity the day before, how that might influence where we're going, either precipitation patterns or what we're going to see in the following day. Now, I do that during the warm season, June, a good example of that. And as I was doing that this morning, noticed tornado reports in Minnesota, saw some pictures of those yesterday afternoon. Saw tornadoes in western Nebraska, some stunning photos of those. I'll show you those in a second. But as I was looking, I saw storm reports rolling in currently. And I'm recording this video about 5 to 6 a.m. Central Time. So that's not always the most common thing to see. And they were really through south central Kansas. And if you look closely, you see this derecho-like bow echo in the early morning hours here pushing through central Kansas. That classic kind of bow echo look. And some of the wind reports associated with this were significant, 80, 85 mile an hour plus. You get above 60 to 70, and you're starting to talk about property damage, whole trees down, not just large limbs, power outages, etc. So again, I know we have some viewers and commenters in this portion of the state. Hoping everybody's staying safe here this morning. Unfortunately, this threat continues here today. The storm's now pushing into Oklahoma this morning, potentially to the west of that. Additional storms firing later today. We'll talk about that in the video in just a second here. I mentioned some of the stunning photos from western Nebraska. A colleague, former professor of mine, Dr. Jeff Frame, took this stunning photo of this tornado, stovepipe tornado. This was near Dickens, Nebraska, again, the western portion of the state. That's just an awesome photo. He's from the University of Illinois, out there with some students storm chasing. And you can follow him at Vortex Jeff, a great follow this time of year for storms and tornado pictures, the rest of the year for meteorological information as well on X/Twitter. Got a wider shot here that I did want to share. It's neat, as you can see, some Amatis clouds hiding in here. This is what we call kind of the forward flank of the storm over to the right, and the sunset behind it. It's just a fantastic shot. You can even see in here, it's kind of hard to make out, but there is this what we call a clear cut or an RFD cut, and that is where the downdraft on the backside of the storm starts to wrap in, starts to peel away some of the clouds here, which you can kind of see here in that weakness, and that's actually helping to wrap in front of this wall cloud here and organize this tornado. So just, again, great shot here from Dr. Jeff Frame, and wishing him luck. He's out chasing again today. If we look just yesterday, these storms formed along a boundary here through the state of Nebraska, kind of starting in Colorado up into Iowa. South of this boundary, we had these stiff south winds through Kansas and southern Nebraska. But if you look at Nebraska, the northeast part of the state, you see these northeast winds here. I know it's hard to see with these smaller observations, but what's happening here is warm, moist air funneling into the south. It's turning quickly, if I kind of follow the streamlines here, turning quickly out of the northeast in Nebraska. And so you actually have spin, vorticity developing at the surface. When these storms fire, especially in the plains here, it'll stretch that spin or vorticity in the vertical. It'll organize that into a rotating supercell, and it can reach all the way to the ground, and you have that beautiful tornado that we saw yesterday. So it's kind of neat to see that. We kind of follow these boundaries this time of year, June and July, where they kind of set up and linger. It's a really good indication of where we're going to get some of that severe storm activity. If I just look here this morning over the south central portions of the plains, I'm going to zoom in. There's those southerly winds coming up. They're turning to the east. And we even see a kind of developing low pressure system now in eastern Colorado, western Kansas. So don't have the states on here, but not a surprise where we're expecting severe thunderstorm developments today. Again, we'll take a closer look at this in just a minute. But that boundary was in Nebraska yesterday. Remember, we just showed that. Shifted south over Kansas now, getting modified by that bow echo we just looked at. If I do look at the storm predictions and reports, this was yesterday. There's the Minnesota tornado reports that we saw, and that tornado from Dr. Frame there in western Nebraska. But look at all these. It's almost hard to see. They're all overlapping. And this is an intense stretch of wind reports here. It's probably ongoing here this morning. These black boxes are what we call significant severe wind. And again, that's when you're getting up into that more significant damaging threshold. Before I jump into the forecast here, we'll look at the precipitation going through the end of June. I did this thought experiment last week. Eric might have mentioned it in a video last week and kind of talked through it with him as well. And this was looking, or an attempt to find years that the Midwest had a quietly dry July. That was the analog package I was looking for. And the reason I did that is because we've talked about this evolving drought conversation this year where there was seasonal drought risk. We've seen so much moisture here in spring, especially to the south and the mid-south and even portions of the Midwest at times, right? Have seen storms. And there's this scenario here where, okay, are we even going to flip over dry? I mean, that's kind of the open question at this point. Is there this remaining drought risk? And so I went back and I tried to find years where we weren't necessarily dry in June. We weren't necessarily dry in August. The year isn't known as a big drought year. That's why I called them quietly dry Julys. But if you bend it just for that month of July, which is about where our forecast confidence ends right now, if you think we're at June 17th, it takes about 13 days out to the end of the month, and that's where our forecast accuracy starts to get pretty muddy, as you know. And if we're waiting on that July dryness, it's just not here yet. It's not clear to us where it is. So is there anything to learn from some of these years where it did flip over on the dry side? So that is the starting point for this thought experiment, if you'll entertain me. And what we found in those Junes, this is 14, 7, 2013, 2002, and 91. And you'll notice as I name them, no major, besides 02, which did see some drought in portions of the Corn Belt, at least later in the year. Right? None of these are going to jump out initially as huge drought years. In fact, some of these, 14 included, were pretty fantastic years, depending on where exactly you were. But in those Junes, we saw ridging over Canada, the Hudson Bay, troughing over the Northeast, and then critically, kind of this weak troughing over the Southern Plains, helping to bring rain in June to the southern part of the country. And we've seen troughing like this over the Northeast Pacific at times this year. We definitely saw ridging over Canada. We talked about the wildfires. Now, this is June specifically, and the time period I'm talking about here, we're not through the whole month of June, right? We haven't gotten that data in yet. But generally speaking, over the kind of last 30 days, this doesn't look totally dissimilar. Now, in just the last few days, this ridging here over Canada has moved west over Alaska. We actually saw a heat advisory there. This troughing here over the Northeast has been shifting around a little bit as well. But generally speaking, this isn't, when I pull this up, not totally dissimilar. When I pull up the June precipitation patterns for, again, those same years, wet in the Southern Plains, wet in the upper Midwest, wet in Florida, and drier in the West. Now, this dry stretch here through the Midwest, we've checked this year. We talked about the kind of lingering drought monitor classifications through this area. We have shifted drier in the Western U.S., so that one's checked as well. We've been drier in Florida, so that kind of signature, if you will, for the analog is not there. We have been wetter in the Southern Plains and then the upper Midwest. We have had some storms here lately, but it's been variable. Some areas of the upper Midwest have gone over wetter. Some are still on the drier side. In fact, if I just show you the last 14 days of precip, you can see that variable story up there. But there is, again, I've called it the I-80 dryness, whatever you want to call it here, is there between the analogs and definitely the Southern Plains. I was kind of surprised to see the similarities when I compared those years to this year. Look at the sea surface temperatures also. In those years, we see that negative PMM, warm in the Central Pacific, no strong La Nina or El Nino signature. And again, this is June to July sea surface temperatures, so wouldn't expect to see that. And the Atlantic is a bit on the cooler side as well. So again, some similarities here. It's not a glaring, clear analog, but there's enough here to kind of make me tilt my head and say, oh, it's kind of an interesting scenario. And then ultimately, when we go look at those Julys, that the height pattern, again, for a quietly dry July, wouldn't expect a huge dominant ridge over the Midwest, right? That's how you get a 2011 or 2012. But we do see ridging over the Northwest. Now, this would yield Northwest flow in those years. However, I think the critical component to why these years ended up dry was more so this troughing here over the Southern Plains. So this lingered all the way into the month of July. And what this does is it forms storms, thunderstorms, showers, fronts, low pressure systems in this area. And that warm moisture, Eric talked about this just yesterday, that Bermuda high pumping moisture in, this is almost like a roadblock. It's going to get lifted up in those storms. It's going to precipitate here, and it's going to be less moisture for the Midwest. So you'll still get some northwest flow. You'll still get some thunderstorms, but they'll be drier. They'll have less moisture available to them with it raining out further to the south. And we saw that kind of exact pattern in those Julys, right? So if I take you all the way back, plenty of water here in the month of July in those years, but not as much moisture getting up into the Midwest, despite not having record dryness in these quietly dry Julys, but enough, right, to at least be thinking about as we turn that calendar, considering some of the similarities there. It's also kind of neat about this, just kind of looking at this briefly. You see this ridge here. Let's kind of trough, ridge here over the eastern part of North America, trough here off the coast of the Pacific, troughing here across Florida. If I switch this quickly over to July in these years, it's kind of neat about this. You see what we call this retrograde. What I mean by that is over time, some of these broader Rossby waves actually retrograde instead of move west to east. We kind of think of our weather as constantly moving west to east, but some of these larger patterns can actually move east to west over a longer time span. So this ridging that was here over central Canada, take it a month later, it actually moves over the northwest United States. This troughing here just off the coast, go to July, actually moves further off the coast. This troughing here over Florida, actually moves further west over the south center. You kind of see how the whole map just shifted west. Again, that Rossby wave retrograde, it's always kind of neat to see that. All right, jumping back here to present day, you can see those lingering showers and storms here over the Central Plains. Talked about those. Some light lingering shower activity over portions of the southeast here this morning. If I look at the upper level height, the jet stream level winds, see this ridge here over the southwest, right? Seeing some heat as a result of that. But above that, kind of, if you'll call this a ridge riding thunderstorm event, to the north of that, this little weakness in the flow here. It's not this big trough like we see off the coast of the Pacific, but little weak kind of deviations in the flow like this in June with all this moisture in the boundary sitting here is just a huge recipe for severe storms. So not a surprise to see the Storm Prediction Center out with that moderate risk for western Kansas here today. Enhanced risk over a wider area, again, along that boundary that we just looked at and that low pressure system spinning up to the west. This is a wind risk primarily. So if I pull up that wind category, you can see that higher risk for straight line winds through the western part of the state. Now, can't rule out tornadoes and some significant hail as well. But again, the reason for the moderate risk, the red Sharpie, is that wind risk here today. Unfortunately, considering they're getting wind here this morning. We jump over and show you the HER forecast. I'm going to make this valid out 6 a.m. See that bow echo well modeled here through the central part of the state. And I know that's small on this projection here. So take this forecast forward. You'll see that weaken quickly as it enters Oklahoma here this morning. But later this afternoon, now 5 p.m. Central Time, additional severe storm development likely in eastern Colorado, northern Kansas. This coalesces overnight into a potential damaging bow echo, derecho-like event through the central part of the state, moving into the eastern part of the state 9 to 12 p.m. I should say 9 p.m. to 12 a.m. Then through Missouri overnight, potentially spinning up one of these bookend vortices. We call these sometimes MCVs, mesoscale convective vortex. I studied these for a time. If you're in Iowa and you're rooting for rain, you're rooting for one of these bookend vortices. They form at the end or the terminus of this, kind of see that comma shape of these derecho-like events. And these tend to spin up and move northeast. And we see that tomorrow as this spins up. This is early in the morning, bringing widespread showers, some rumbles of thunder to the central eastern part of the state of Iowa. And then it's a waiting game tomorrow afternoon. This is Wednesday, for additional severe thunderstorm potential supercell development in eastern Illinois, central Indiana. Storm Prediction Center has a enhanced risk out for that area, a wider slight risk out across the Midwest into the southern plains. And Thursday, this activity is shifting to the east, the mid-Atlantic, up into portions of New England through DC and New Jersey as well. Now, behind this system, as it continues to move through, I just showed you that HER forecast. You notice this kind of lack, right? We're seeing the severe weather here today and tomorrow. You see it go over no risk categories from the SPC. You see it pick up here in the northern part of the country. Starting to see that ridge riding flow coming in behind this system here. So as this low pressure system clears out of the area, it allows some high pressure systems and that ridge to develop in behind it. And we start to see our late week ridge build into the area as we go into Thursday and Friday. You can even see that on the Storm Prediction Center outlook, which is neat. Now, if we just jump over and look at that actual 500 millibar height forecast, I'll make this valid about 7 a.m. There's that kind of, again, that weakness in the flow in June. These can be prolific severe storm producers. So in spring, March, right, we're looking for these deep troughs, but in June, it just takes these little deviations in the flow. So as that moves through Wednesday, moves through the Midwest, that's Wednesday afternoon, now into the Mid-Atlantic and New England on Thursday. So that's why that severe activity is shifting to the east. But here comes that ridge in behind it, that central U.S. ridge now over Nebraska on early Friday. Heat builds into the Midwest Friday evening, entrenched more so over the Midwest on Saturday, and it just continues to amplify on Sunday, again, maybe centered over Columbus. Continues on Monday, Tuesday, out into Wednesday of next weekend. We still see that ridging over portions of the Midwest. Now, it has been moving slowly west to east over the time. So it was centered over Nebraska earlier in the forecast, now all the way over to the mid-Atlantic, getting out into the middle of next week. But all the while on the periphery of that, expecting storm development through the Midwest. So I kind of take you back, starting in the Canadian Prairie, closer to this weekend, and then we still see this lingering troughing over the west. Just a great setup for severe storms moving through along the periphery of that ridge, likely through the Midwest as well. So we kind of wait for that. In the meantime, the 7-day forecast, this is from the WPC. This is the activity just here this week. So today and tomorrow. And then into Thursday, as the storm system shifts to the east, wide area of heavy precipitation likely in the middle part of the country. Again, we mentioned the quietly dry July. I mean, this just don't see this widespread sort of drought concern yet this year. If we jump over and look at the ECMWF precipitation departures, this is the next 5 days. Take it out to 7 days. Again, we start seeing this weekend and early next week that activity in the Canadian Prairie, thanks to that ridge moving in, the ridge riding thunderstorms associated with that. And really that 4 to 10 day, right? That's getting out into that kind of what we called it maybe a Columbus Ridge. And you can just see all the way around it, prairie included, ridge riding thunderstorm activity. I mean, you can just paint the ridge right here underneath. We'll have to watch some of the areas in the Midwest going over dry, but some of these areas in the Eastern Corn Belt, they'll probably take this to get some more work done. Want to look at the maximum temperature forecast here. This is for today on Tuesday. So some of this induced by that boundary that we saw. Some of this is just showers and storms. So take this into tomorrow on Wednesday with all the shower and thunderstorm activity here over the central part of the country. Seeing cooler temperatures there, staying warm out in the western U.S. On Thursday, this starts to shift as that ridge starts to move in behind that system, departing now through the mid-Atlantic. By Friday, mentioned the Midwest going over warmer. On Friday, very warm over in central Nebraska. Continues on Saturday, right? The same area we were just talking about severe thunderstorms. On Sunday, more anchored over the Midwest proper. And now by Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of next week, we're going to see this heat really build into the Eastern Corn Belt in the mid-Atlantic. Look at the ECMWF, jump over and take a look at that precipitation forecast. This is for, let's make this valid, about 7 a.m. today. 7 p.m. tonight, severe thunderstorm development expected over Kansas, pushing into Missouri, and then showers and thunderstorms likely in central and eastern Iowa overnight into tomorrow morning. This is now 7 a.m. You can see that low pressure system near Madison, Wisconsin, and a line of severe storms potentially forming somewhere in eastern Illinois tomorrow afternoon. This is around lunchtime. See this strengthening as it moves through southern Illinois into central Indiana, potentially all the way back into portions of Oklahoma Wednesday evening. See that low pressure system shifting off into Montreal near Thursday evening, and a line potentially of severe thunderstorms moving through the mid-Atlantic up into New England. This is Thursday night, and then overnight waiting behind that system, that ridge building in. We're going to see that activity pick up on the periphery. So there's that one thunderstorm complex moving through the Dakotas and through the upper Midwest now into Saturday. See widespread prairie precipitation, Saskatchewan, Alberta. Now on Sunday, potentially more ridge riding thunderstorms. This is on Monday morning to Monday evening. Nebraska, Dakotas, Northwest Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, South Dakota. This is Tuesday morning. Just continued activity here Wednesday. And then what we're seeing here late next week is this ridge even getting further to the east. Some of the troughing that was positioned here over the far western U.S. is getting further out toward the Continental Divide. And precipitation, I should say, starts filling in later next week into the middle part of the country, underneath some of these areas that were further in that heat and that dry forecast here from the ECMWF. We see that same kind of weakening of the ridge. I'm going to take you all the way out to next week. This is June 24th on Tuesday. And this is now Friday, June 27th. So we continue to slowly see that ridge break down and move further off to the east. Now not a Columbus Ridge. This is what do we call this? A Long Island Ridge. And that troughing, that weakness in the flow out west, getting further toward the Continental Divide, opening up some of these areas for renewed precipitation development. We jump over and look at the, let's do the GFS. Take it back. Let's do the ECMWF ensemble forecast late next week. So I want to give you a sense for, if we go 7, 10, 8 to 14 day outlook, right? Some of these areas here where we're kind of worried about getting into some of that heat and dryness here into the next week, likely going over wet. At some point later next week, as that ridge moves out of the area to the east, you can almost kind of see that signature there with the precipitation activity moving in behind that. I did want to mention briefly here this morning that we are watching in the Eastern Pacific the development. This is Tropical Storm Eric, was named here recently, and I mentioned this one for two reasons. One, it's expected to stay further in our area, and what I mean by that is just to our south. So a lot of these systems that have formed early this year have gone to the west, and the ridges have kind of moved along this with that. Tropical Storm Eric here is expected to strengthen potentially into a significant hurricane as it moves up toward southern coast of Mexico. And because it's kind of staying in this area, we're not seeing this sort of connected ridge component to it that might split the flow over the central part of the country. And that could be one reason kind of playing into why we're seeing ridging stay over the central and eastern U.S. over the kind of 7-day forecast here. But did want to mention it because it's a bit stronger here than some of the storms that have formed early in the eastern Pacific might be of note, unfortunately, for residents in southern Mexico. That is relevant briefly. Mexico has been a little bit drier here this spring, so dealing with some drought in portions of the northwest part of the state. The Yucatan has been dry as well. A lot of moisture is coming to the state as a result of Eric and then the broader Central American gyre that's been spinning over this area, kind of helping to spin up some of these tropical systems. And unfortunately, some of these areas that are in more need of that precipitation aren't seeing as much of it from this very, very wet pattern. A lot of this rainfall staying over the central part of the state through the 7 to 10 day forecast here. Did want to look at one more area of that forecast precipitation. So I took you, this is the ECMWF ensemble forecast. Again, we'll look at the 7-day. See some of that activity here. This is what's expected here this week. Now, this area is likely to receive rainfall. We just looked at this in the Storm Prediction Center outlook. But because it's just generally a wet time of year here in the middle of June with kind of quickly moving thunderstorms, that low pressure system moving Wednesday to Thursday quickly across this area, despite water getting to the ground here being a pretty likely scenario, still on the drier side of the 7-day precipitation anomaly. Kind of one of the drawbacks of using an anomaly chart for some of this. However, if I take this forecast into the 10-day, that 8 to 14-day, we saw some of these areas fill in here. The upper Midwest continuing to stay wet. So take it out to 14 days. You'll notice that ridging here, how long it took to move to the east, and that kept Florida and portions of the southeast here. Let's call it Georgia, the Carolinas, and again, the state of Florida. This is an area we might need to be concerned about, and I mentioned that at the end here. So we are still seeing some lingering drought classifications over the state of Florida. They have gone over dry at times, then they have quickly gone back over wet, and then it just kind of seems to be an on-off. So now they're going over back dry, it seems, in the 10 to 14-day forecast. Just another thing to kind of keep an eye on here. But this area where we were concerned about drought development, kind of pushing into June, it's plenty wet over the next kind of 10 to 14 days, I would think. We'll have to watch this area here. That's going to go over a little bit warmer and drier. That's probably not a bad thing. We need to get GDDs into this area here, heat units, and the dryness with some of the precipitation that might be coming late next week won't necessarily be a bad thing. However, if it does stay dry and we start flipping into July and some of that rain misses late next week, this could enter the conversation of an area to watch. But right now, not a huge concern, just kind of putting it on our radar here. As far as that kind of quietly dry July flip, the ECMWF weeklies, if I show you kind of a 7-day rolling window of precipitation anomalies, take you out through the end of June here. There's that upper Midwest bullseye that we talked about, some of that rainfall getting into the central and eastern Corn Belt. Hopefully after some of the heat this weekend and next week, we see that scenario play out. But continuing to see, right, over the next 14 days, this is essentially kind of a 7 to 14 day forecast here. The southeast we have to watch for. And then into early July, middle July, and late July. Again, not putting too much weight into that forecast here, but the weekly is the ECMWF extended forecast, which does take us through the whole month of July now, has continuously run kept the central part of the country dry. Again, a little bit closer to that quietly dry July scenario. Now, the good news is we're talking about precipitation over Kansas today, probably too much of it. We've talked about too much precipitation here. This is an area that's wet. It has some lead here to deal with some dryness if it builds in early July, especially if it breaks later in the month. But I am going to keep an eye on this forecast going out forward. There's nothing that has really shaken the ECMWF from this scenario, and at least looking at those quietly dry analog years from the thought experiment earlier in this video, there's enough to kind of keep that concern lingering for me. But given the moisture situation that we've improved, it's not as glaring a concern as it might have been earlier this year. We'll talk with you all Thursday. As these severe thunderstorms move through, please stay safe, and Eric will talk with you all tomorrow.